by Steve Austin.
Chapter 7. Arrivals and Departures. Matheela and Dinari lay entwined in loving embrace upon Matheela's bed for nearly half an hour before either spoke. The loving touch of Dinari was working the purpose Matheela had desperately sought. As they lay together in their post-lovemaking bliss, Matheela felt the weight of her burden lighten. She felt secure and safe in Dinari's arms, and was ready to discuss her troubles with her beloved partner. Dinari broke the silence.
"Shall I summon a winch to bathe us and refresh your bed, darling?"
"Yes, my love. And perhaps a bit of tonic water and a spot of brandy would be nice as well."
"Done,"
Dinari replied as she reached for the bell on the nightstand. She rang, and within a minute a serving winch tapped lightly on the door of the suite. The winch cracked the door open and politely inquired,
"How may I serve you, madame?"
Dinari answered,
"Yes, dear. If you would please gather a tub of warm water, soaps, oils, and such, as Matheela and I need to be bathed. Also fresh bedclothes, and a flask of tonic, and a bottle of brandy, please. Can you remember that, sweetheart?"
"Yes, madam. Anything else?"
"Perhaps half a loaf of Boniscus and some fresh honey, dear. Thank you so much, my darling."
The winch scurried off to gather the items to refresh the madams, and Dinari turned to Matheela.
"Now, sweetness, what is it that troubles your heart so?"
She answered,
"Minerva."
And with that, Matheela told Dinari the long story of the friendship she and Minerva once shared. How the friendship was terminated, the issue of Mortebrae Minerva had placed on her, and the full scope of Minerva's plans to use the Proc ogres to take control of Aeros.
Oh, hail the inherent. Damn, you have been carrying this burden all this time and never spoke of it? Oh, my poor, sweet darling. You should have come to me long ago.
"I was afraid, dearest. Afraid having that knowledge would possibly endanger you. I couldn't do that to one I love so deeply. But now, the time for caution is well past. At this point, not having this knowledge can and likely will endanger you."
Oh, precious, you are so brave, blessings inherent upon you 1,000-fold. Does anyone outside the Order aside from you and I know that Minerva's scheme entails more than simply declaring war on Aeros?
I don't think so. I don't think at this point even the wisest amongst the powers that be suspect anything beyond war, which Minerva intends to play to her advantage, I am sure. All save Jerome, perhaps. In my discussion with him last night, he was obviously prodding to see what I was willing to disclose, and I'm sure he knew I was withholding details, yet was wise enough to know when to back down. I did contemplate revealing the whole of her plan to him. But
fear that Minerva will actually pursue the edict on your life prevented you?
Yes. Minerva declared Mortebrae on me over 2 decades ago, but has made no effort to hunt me down and execute the sentence. Perhaps there is a small spark of the friendship we once shared still alight in her cold witch's heart, which stays her hand. Or perhaps she issued the edict as little more than a tactic to ensure my silence. Or both. Yet should I disclose the full nature of her plans, I fear she would have members of the Order tearing the front door off of the wayward maid and have me dragged to the Dissilry without delay for execution of sentence.
Dinari shook her pretty annoyed head in disbelief. How could anyone live with such an edict sworn against them? And on top of that, to live just a mere hour's walk from those sworn to kill you.
Oh, my dear sweet witch. Such a brave soul you are. To live with such fear. I am honored that you instill such trust in me as to disclose these things under fear of death. Of course, you know my silence is guaranteed beyond what oath can warrant.
Of that I have no doubt, sweet Dinari. I am blessed indeed to have a friend in you, one upon whom I can unburden myself of my darkest fears. I love you beyond what heart can measure.
And I you, precious Matheela. Be assured you have in me a loving confidant who will never abandon you, even should every witch of the Order descend upon us.
A tap came on the door, and 3 winches entered the room, one holding a tray with the food and drink, another with the bathing articles and the bedclothes, and the third holding a basin of hot water.
Ah, bless you, my dears. Please prepare seating for us, and we shall have our bread and brandy as you bathe us.
She leaned over to Matheela and spoke softly into her ear.
As for you, my precious, we must get you far away from the Dissilry. After we are bathed and refreshed, we shall begin preparation to depart to the east. And yes, I am coming with you.
Friday, the 22nd day of Darmay, 6:30 a.m. Just after the cock had crowed on this fine day in the month of Darmay, which ushered in the summer in Aeros, Shanaeah awoke. She glanced up at the ceiling with its ornately carved oaken beams, and took much solace in the realization that she was safe in her suite in the palace of Boniscus.
Morning, my love.
Oh, Da, you startled me.
Sorry, sweets. Didn't mean to frighten you. Did you sleep well?
Oh, you have no idea. After 4 nights on the floor of a dungeon, a cot in the corner of a hovel would have seemed like heaven. Yes, my dreams were pleasant beyond description. How long have you been here, Dar?
Since daybreak, about a half hour ago. I thought the first face you saw this morning should be handsome beyond compare.
Shanaeah giggled lightly.
Well then, why am I staring at the glorified hen's ass which sits upon your neck?
Well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, they say. There are those who compare my face to that of the fairest elven princelings.
Yes? Well, there are those that compare sheep shit to honey, but I wouldn't spread the former on my bread.
At this, Darkeenum guffawed.
So glad to be in the company of a freshly awakened smartass. If you think you might close that belligerent hole under your nose long enough to put your bloomers on, we might go downstairs and have a spot of breakfast. Or would Her Majesty prefer it delivered to her suite?
Oh no, I want to go down and eat with the family. You're welcome to come down as well. You can sit under the table and perhaps I'll drop you a few scraps from my plate.
Oh, well then. Consider me overwhelmingly honored by your favor, Your Highness. Perhaps you might open your legs and allow me a peek at the royal toonch as well.
Oh, just stop it, you dirty-minded little nomo-perv. I often think if my quim grew shut, you'd feed me to a dragon on your way to the Splurt house.
Never, my love. Finding a dragon with a palate lacking enough discretion to stomach you would be too big a chore. I just don't have the time, my dear.
Well, I certainly wouldn't want you to go out of your way on my account. Fine, then. I'll feed myself to the dragon and you can proceed directly to the Splurt house. Just don't let your feelings be hurt when the maidens laugh at you. You little needle-dicked fartmonger.
They won't laugh long. After I'm done, they'll think that orgasm-anuli thing you can do is but a hiccup compared to the orgasmic prowess of the great Darkeenum.
10 seconds of silence, then both burst out laughing.
Fine. I concede unto thee, O great god of all things sensual. Now hand me my tunic and let's go down to the dining hall before the food gets cold and the maid throws it out when she empties the chamber pots.
And once Shanaeah had donned her bloomers, tunic, skirt, and slippers, they made off toward the dining hall to enjoy a breakfast with the family. Renata, Danine, Sasha, and Celine sat at the main table in the dining hall. It wasn't quite sunup yet on this Friday morning, but they had planned to gather early to have a chat before the food was served, and the other diners arrived. As they sat and sipped their coffee with a shot of Millanin, the cordial of the half-breed, the conversation took a serious turn. We find Danine briefing her sister Renata on the remarkable occurrences involving Shanaeah that had taken place just prior to, and then shortly after her escape from the dungeons of Rorsch.
Since her escape, and during it as well, my suspicions, while not absolutely confirmed, were definitely strengthened. Her proclivity for spells, be they spritish or marfo in nature, is growing at a rapid rate. No novice should be able to hold a witch of the stature Minerva enjoys captive in a spell, much less a series of spells, for the amount of time Shanaeah was able to hold her. When she cast the Orgasmanial, which came to her at the very moment of need and completely out of the blue, she cast it with one word. Even a Marfo witch of the most advanced skill set has to repeat the incantation numerous times before it takes effect. Yet with a single word she was able to floor Darkeenum and herself as well. She later told me she cast it again, over a group of 4, and again, out of the blue, the suffix needed to exclude herself from the spell came to her. And again, with one word, she caused 4 gnomes to experience the throes of Orgasmanial on a high level. That's a feat Minerva herself could not accomplish if my guesses are accurate.
So, you would have me believe my daughter is the one foretold? Should I leap into the air and rejoice, or fall to the floor in utter despair?
At this point I can't say for sure, dear sister. Our knowledge of the Loritanes, the Ganeranese book of law and prophecy, is sketchy at best. but the signs I am aware of from the book all suggest she may well be. I wish there was a way we could gain access to the Yester library and peruse the book, but that, I fear, is near impossible.
Isn't her uncle Jerome a minister?
Sasha interjected.
Yes, but he is no more welcome beyond the breaking wall than you and I are. He denounced the High Court and is under a death warrant in the Four Cities. He's known there as Jerome the Heretic.
What about intel thieves, then?
Too risky at this point. Oddicombe feels we may need the High Court of Dunbury to declare war on Minerva at some point if we are to stem her upcoming assault. We don't want to chance turning the court against us first. It appears there are no solid answers at this point. Are there, Dineen?
Well, we need to arrange for her first power commune as soon as possible. That will tell us much. The Foretold One will gain immense magical prowess from her first commune, and inexplicable knowledge and wisdom will also impart itself upon her as she embraces the elements. We should consult with the tree imps of the wood of Boniscus. They will no doubt be willing to help ensure her safety as she communes. And there is an element of Shanaeah's first commune, if I remember the old text correctly, which may require channels, and tree imps are perfect to serve in that capacity. There are also a few other tests we might perform, but that may prove unnecessary after...
At that point, Shanaeah and Darkeenum entered the dining hall, followed by Oddicombe and Jerome.
Mother, Auntie Daneen,
Shanaeah said as she approached them and held out her arms. The two lady sprites rose and embraced her lovingly.
Oh, your wings, your beautiful wings, 1,000 deaths to the heartless bastards who clipped them.
And Renata began to lightly sob.
please don't cry, Mom. They are already half grown back, and I'll be flying again before 7 more sunrises.
I know, sweetheart, but it burns me to the core to think of what those filthy shit-eaters did to you. I'm sorry, honey. I shouldn't remind you of it. I'll let it go for now. But that bitch, Minerva... Sorry. How did you sleep, darling?
Fantastic. I feel rejuvenated tenfold.
And I'm absolutely delighted that you escorted her home, Dar. I think she prefers your company to that of anyone who walks on Aerosian soil.
And Renata embraced the handsome little gnome tightly. Darkeenum returned her embrace and said,
I feel the same about her, Mom. And after all that's transpired, I'm not sure I'll ever let her out of my sight again.
They both chuckled lightly, and Renata answered,
Well, you two have been practically inseparable since Shanaeah was 2 years old, so she shouldn't be surprised that you feel that way. I know I will feel much better knowing you are keeping an eye, or two, on her.
Stop trying to schmooze my mother, you little charmer. You know you are the son she never wanted, right?
And you are the daughter she was cursed with. And I'll thank you to refrain from interrupting my schmoozery henceforth, my darling. I had absolutely no intention of chatting the Lady Renata up. Okay, I was maybe going to chat her up a little. She is quite fetching, you know.
Yes, and I imagine she would prefer the company of a mountain goat to yours, you insufferable little maniacal pervo gnome.
Now, Shanaeah, Darkeenum is welcome to schmooze on me any time he wants. He is quite the little sweetheart.
See there, mountain goat indeed. Thank you, milady Renata. I am indeed warmed by your favor.
Don't be so flattered, Mum. This little charm merchant will schmooze on anything in a skirt. Up to and including ogres, trolls, even witches, and most likely if you put a skirt on a mountain goat, Dar would try to chat it up.
As the three were enjoying a nice giggle behind the playful banter, the servers began to bring the provender and set the table. Boniscus loaves and Donavarian honey, rashers of fresh bacon, coffee and melanin, eggs cooked in every variety one could imagine. Browned potatoes, marfo milk, and various fruits were all set upon the board. Lieutenant Ranneman and Denish joined them, and the mood and the conversation was light and jovial. As the meal concluded and they sipped their cordials, Oddicombe rose.
Your attention, please, friends, family, and honored guests. There will be a meeting in the Contravisory tomorrow mid-morning. The presence of each of you is respectfully requested, and I am sure the topic of discussion needs no fanfare. Until that time, I bid you please be at peace and make yourselves at home here in the Palace of Boniscus. Don't be reluctant to partake in any of the amenities herein. Blessings inherent and be of great spirit.
The sun had just ascended the horizon in Harless as Parthis and Dinari sat at breakfast in their private dining cubby at the Wayward Maid.
Please lock the door, Parthis. We have something of a very serious nature to discuss.
As Parthis rose and threw the bolt on the door to the cubby, he asked,
It's concerning the Marfa witch Matheela and the doings at the Dissilry, I presume. No?
Yes. How did you know?
Jerome and I had a discussion on the subject right before he left for Don Avarice. He had a feeling she might talk to you about it. Felt she knew more than she told him about whatever it is Minerva has up her sleeve concerning those ogres she has been collecting. Did she tip her hand to you, Dinari?
She did. And that is why we must take her as far away from the Dissilry as we can. What she knows certainly needs to be passed on to the powers that be, but not with Matheela living an hour's walk from those who would seek to kill her. So we must take her far away from here before we can persuade her to divulge her information to anyone.
I suppose that includes me as well. Not an issue. Probably better I remain in the dark at this point. I also gather that you intend to journey with her. Also not an issue. As much as I hate to put you in danger, and as much as I shall miss you, it may well be you departing harless with her will in the long run be the safest option. After all, if Minerva determines it necessary to have Matheela killed, then she would most likely take you as well, seeing as the bond between the two of you is not that well kept of a secret. Jerome knew how close the two of you are, so one can assume that that knowledge is relatively common.
So, how long will it take to arrange for our departure?
There are 3 merchants lodging here who intend to depart tomorrow. They plan on heading north to Norton, and when their business there is concluded, they plan on catching a barge headed down the River Manx to where it joins the Great River, then on from there to Port Parsis on the shores of the Aegean Sea. That route will keep you away from the Dissilry and give you options concerning where you disembark. Boniscus, the half-breed city, is the first option. The elven cities of Preen and Fornade are a little further east along the river. Then there's the Noid city of Morganton, which sits halfway between Preen and Port Parsis, then Port Parsis itself.
I want her condyle removed. Her magic could be a necessary defense at some point.
Again, I agree. I've refused to do so as long as she was working here. But under these circumstances, I think it would be foolish to deprive her, and you, of the use of magic to defend yourselves. We will fashion a false condyle for her to wear so the merchants will be at ease. We will portray her as your charge in transit to a splurt house out east.
That guise should work nicely, I think.
All right. You go to Matheela and inform her of the plan. Pack what amenities the two of you will need. Bare necessities, you must travel light and fast. I will journey to the lending house in Prentice and withdraw sufficient gold to pay for your passage, feed and house you along the way, and acquire a dwelling for you wherever it is you decide to settle. I suppose I should first speak to the merchants and establish the price of passage. I shall visit the clothier in Prentice and acquire travel wear and packs for you. I will also transfer a sum of money to the lending house in Morganton. Stop there even if you decide to proceed eastward thereafter. Seek out Barlimus. He owns and operates the Splurt House in Morganton. He's an old friend of mine. Noid gentleman. Good fella. He will put you up while you await the transfer to arrive at the lending house, since you will likely arrive there before it does.
Can you remove her condyle before you go? She may want to reacquaint herself with a few spells before we set out. It has been 20+ years since you attached it to her.
Yes, dear, of course. Again, sound thinking. Blessings inherent upon you, dear wife. If tonight be the last night we spend together, then we shall make a night of it neither of us shall soon forget.
And blessings upon you as well, my most dear and honorable husband. I thank you so much for being so understanding, and for being so wise. I have always loved you, and I always will. And yes, we will make tonight a most memorable and pleasurable occasion. I only hope it won't be our last.
Have hope, good wife. I have a feeling that there is a force at work for the greater good that we at this point can't truly fathom. And I feel that that force is strong beyond what has been known in Aeros ever before.
Ah, Jerome, my brother of a different mother. I was overjoyed to find you among the entourage accompanying Shanaeah. I'm having ale brought up from the barrel stay in the Great River. We can have a pint or two while we catch up.
A barrel stay is a semi-submerged fence which holds barrels of liquids or other perishable goods in place in a river, lake, or creek to keep the commodity cold. They were still in the dining hall following the morning meal. Jerome and Oddicum were seated near the head of the table, awaiting the arrival of the ale and chatting amongst themselves. Danine and Renata were a few chairs down, sipping coffee and Milanin, deep in discussion concerning matters in the sprite capital of Tenella. Darkeenum had went to visit with gnomish friends who resided in Boniscus, leaving Shanaeah to entertain herself for the rest of the morning. She didn't feel particularly inclined to interrupt or attempt to join in on either of the conversations currently occurring at the great table. She sat at the foot of the table by herself and found herself thinking about the complicated story concerning her fraternal heritage. Although Shanaeah refers to Jerome as her uncle, he is in reality her second cousin. Nedicum, grandfather to Oddicum and Jerome, was a high justice in the court of Dunbury. Nedicum had 2 sons, Otis and Garnemon. Otis was Oddicum's father. Garnemon sired Jerome. Both Otis and Garnemon married Menista maidens from well-respected homes. They were both being groomed for office within the court and lived a relatively privileged existence within Menista society. While Garnemon was the model Menista, Otis had a secret habit of sneaking off to the elvish splurt house in Fornade. In spite of the fact that this was illegal under Menista law, he became enamored of an elvish working lady named Brina and visited her often. On one particular evening, Brina failed to renew the Incaptus Tubella, the common spell used by working ladies and others, to temporarily bind the fallopian tubes and prevent conception. She was impregnated by Otis, and 8 months later, gestation for Menista infants, Oddicum was born. Otis convinced his wife to take Oddicum in, hiding the fact that he was actually the son of an elvish working lady. Oddicum to this day has never met his birth mother. Otis had her sent to a splurt house in Black Mountain, far to the west. Jerome was born 14 months later. The two grew up together and always referred to each other as brother. Oddicum, although half elven, showed little or no physical traits of the elvish. His ears were rounded. He was olive-complected. He was short for a Menista male, 6'5", but had the typical broad-shouldered muscular build of all males of the species. His intelligence was on par, or in actuality beyond, that of the Menista, and he flew through each level of the Menista curriculum with great ease. The charade went on without the slightest notice until he was 32 years old, 1 year past legal adulthood in Menista society. Seemingly out of the blue, he became capable of working elvish magic, healing both physical and spiritual. Spells contrived to harness the elements, and spells to temper or enhance aggression were hallmarks of the elvish mage, and Oddicum had a natural ability in all 3 of these areas. Even though he knew magic carried a penalty of death within the Menista, he could not in good conscience deny his genetic disposition. He questioned his father concerning the matter of his birth, and after much denial and anguish, Otis finally confessed to Oddicum the details of his genealogy. Upon learning the true nature of his being, Oddicum knew he couldn't stay within the breaking wall, and he basically banished himself. He settled in the then small town of Boniscus, which at the time was peopled with gnomes, displaced elves, Dinari and sprites, and a small population of noids. Due to his high intelligence and immense magical abilities, coupled with the abilities of the gnomish inhabitants for growing things, he soon changed Boniscus from a small, insignificant township into a booming mecca of agricultural commerce. The hybrid wheat he and the gnomes developed is the major ingredient which makes all other bread in Aeros pale by comparison to that of Boniscus loaf. He and the gnomes welcomed half-breeds comprised of any genetic makeup. Gnomes can only impregnate other gnomes, so they remain purebred due to that inability, but they are also devoid of prejudice and welcomed those of diverse race. And Boniscus became known as the city of the half-breed. Meanwhile, Jerome had ascended to the rank of Justice Minor. Aides to the High Court, it was from the ranks of the Justice Minor that high justices were selected. But Jerome learned of the plight of his brother and began to question the statutes of the High Court. Finally able to contain his convictions no longer, he challenged the court, who in turn deemed him a heretic and sentenced him to death. When Oddicum learned of this, he assembled a task force of sprites, including powerful male sprites of the Solitarian sect, more on them later. Elves, gnomes, and even a few rock giants, more on them later as well, created a diversion while the sprites bombarded the dungeon where Jerome was held with spells of the anti-captivity variety, and Jerome's imprisonment ended that day. 22 years later, Oddicum met and fell in love with a gorgeous Genarian sprite named Renata. He made her his legally bound concubine. Sprites are reluctant to marry due to their Generion maniacal nature, on top of the fact that they are eternal. And a year later, Shanaeah was born. So, if you did the math, you may recall Jerome is 101. You are now aware that Shanaeah is 50 years old. Were she annoyed, she would be considered middle-aged. But considering her genetic makeup, she is still a very, very, very young adult. The Manista, as you know, can live to be 200 years old. Elves have a lifespan of 900 to 1,000 years. Sprites are eternal. They never age, and unless they are killed, which is very hard to do, they never die. This is one reason female sprites usually only conceive 1 or 2 offspring. Considering that the sprite gene is the dominant of the 3, followed by the elf, and lastly the Manista, it's a safe bet that Shanaeah will be around for many centuries, if not forever. She had been raised in Boniscus and was surrounded by gnomes from the day of her birth, both residents of the half-breed city and inhabitants of Dawn Avarice and Pandina. Her mother and Aunt Danine spent a lot of time in the gnomish cities, and as a result so did Shanaeah. Whenever her mother and aunt had business to attend to on these trips, Shanaeah would be left in the care of Darvis and his wife Katina, and became fast and long-lasting friends with their son, Darkeenum, who was 6 years older than she. The two became inseparable, and as Renata perceived of just how deep their friendship went, she petitioned Audicum to allow Darkeenum to be educated alongside Shanaeah. Audicum wisely submitted to her request, as Darkeenum's presence made the lessons more enjoyable for her, and as a result her instructors as well. So as it now stands, Darkeenum is just as schooled in the arts of diplomacy and warfare as is his gorgeous winged best friend. Shanaeah has never met any of her fraternal ancestors. Her grandfather Otis, great-uncle Garnemon, and great-grandfather Neticum have never ventured beyond the breaking wall, and since elves and Generian sprites are not allowed to pass within the wall, her forefathers remain estranged to her to this day. Her actual fraternal grandmother, Brina, as far as she knew, still resided in Black Mountain, a city of the Bartane elves in the far western reaches of Aeros, and was most likely unaware of Shanaeah's existence.
Sweetheart,
Renata said, placing her hand on Shanaeah's shoulder and jarring her from the mental brush-up on her father's history she was conducting.
Your aunt and I are going to fly to the wood of Boniscus to consort with the tree imps. We're willing to walk instead, if you'd care to join us.
Tree imps. What her aunt and mother saw in those annoying little fairy bugs Shanaeah just couldn't fathom. Their shrill voices alone were enough to bring a reasonable person to the very brink of insanity. They spoke so fast it was often difficult to decipher what the point was they were, or weren't, working up to. They repeated themselves over and over, which did kind of make up for the rapidity of their speech, but in and of itself was still annoying. The constant fluttering about. They have wings similar to those of the Luna moth. To and fro and back again caused neck cramps, as one tried to follow their movement. And after all was said, it didn't seem to Shanaeah that any information of importance had been imparted.
No, Mom. I think I shall go up to my room and invoke Splendetta. I have a few matters I want to mull over before the meeting of the minds tomorrow morning. You and Auntie Danine go. Perhaps another time.
Okay. Suit yourself, darling.
And Renata kissed her lips and she and Danine left the dining hall.